I'm on one end, I'm quite humble. On the other end, I'm quite like, what the fuck is this on about? And I'm
wow,
like,
he's gone in with the swear words early.
So before we jump straight into what is our inaugural roundtable virtually, I'd just like to hand over to the 5 speakers just to give a short intro to yourselves so the guys know who we're listening to, and then we'll jump straight in. So Steve, you're first on my screen. Do you want to go first?
Sure. So Steve Wade, platform lead at Metal. If you came to the last meetup, you would have heard me give some emotional talk with 0 slides. I've been using Kubernetes since 1.2 and kind of a heavy ambassador of GitOps.
Nice one, thank you, mate. Rob, did you want to go next?
Sure, yeah. I'm Rob Greenwood, co-founder and CTO at Steamhouse. So we're an advanced AWS consulting partner based in Manchester. So we do quite a lot of work around sort of serverless containers, and definitely a lot of work around Kubernetes as well.
Nice. Maurice?
Yeah, hi, I'm Maurice. I'm the CTO of Red Cubes, and we deliver a cloud agnostic platform for container delivery. And yeah, I've been a self-proclaimed automation guy since the early 90s, I'd say.
Cool, thanks for that. Jay?
Cool. So hey, I'm Jay Kishore. I'm a co-founder and CEO of a company called Appia. We enable development teams to build and ship applications securely in cloud using sort of Kubernetes and really leveraging sort of open source and best practice in cloud across all 3 cloud providers.
Excellent.
It's my turn, I guess.
Go on, Arthur.
Yes, so yeah, my name is Irfan Ansari. I come from actually developer background. I've been Java developer and then Groovy and then came to Scala. Finally moved actually on infrastructure side. So I started with Terraform and then with a couple of clouds. I started with GCP, and the very first project was GKE. That's what actually I used. I used Terraform. And in recent one, doing a lot of on EKS, actually building the platform to deploy microservices while working with the dev team, being me, developer myself. I think it's working very well. So that's me.
Excellent. Okay, guys, well, thank you very much for that. Hopefully that gives everyone a bit of a flavour of who we're hearing from. If there is anyone that's listening that wants to throw a question in or that has something to add on to anything that's been said, if you could do me a favour and put it in the chat box, then I'll obviously ask that out for you as well, just so we don't have 20 people trying to talk at the same time. That would be great. So what we'll do, guys, we'll go through the questions. I've already sent them to you, and then literally, give your opinion, give your answer. Hopefully it will spark a bit of discussion between the 5 of you. I'll try and have as much input as I can, but I'm probably not going to have half as much as you guys. So yeah, I'll just be the quiz master, basically. So the first question that we have.
So I've got experience in the 3 what I would call in inverted commas major clouds. So Amazon, Google, and Azure. I have experience in other kind of bespoke clouds like Rackspace and things like that. But the 3 main ones I have experience in. Specifically at Metal, we're using Amazon. We actually have our own homegrown kind of Kubernetes cluster. We we don't use the managed service provider there, but in the other two clouds that we're talking about, so Google and Azure, I've used their managed service.
Nice. Okay, Rob, you're more sort of heavily focused on the AWS side, right?
Yeah, so I think experience-wise, pretty much entirely AWS. So historically, that is sort of homegrown clusters, sort of prior to the sort of EKS and subsequently the sort of Fargate releases from Amazon, and then obviously more recently, pretty much predominantly EKS and Fargate. And I think in terms of businesses as well. So we do quite a lot of work with sort of businesses that Amazon send our way that have built sort of homegrown platforms and are kind of looking to move more towards sort of offloading some of that day-to-day Kubernetes management onto a kind of more managed service thing.
Nice. Okay. Jay, Maurice, found any thoughts on this? I mean, any more experience with one provider or the other?
Yeah, sure. So I guess that our sort of journey with Kubernetes started pretty early on in 2015. So we have been using it since 0.4 and I think 0.6 in production for better or worse. So in Amazon, we kind of did things the hard way, and then we're actually building tooling before sort of COPS turned up, and now we kind of maintain that project. We have like some of the top maintainers within the company that maintain the open source COPS project, and then I guess across the three cloud providers, we've built a product called Core Operate that integrates, that kind of I guess takes some of that just standing on the shoulders of cloud providers and using their managed services to really give developers back that experience, so they don't have to go in and learn how to spin up VPCs and deal with IAM and all of that kind of stuff across cloud providers.
Yeah, and since we are developing a product that is aimed at being deployable onto the big three, I know quite some ins and outs about all three. I've been using it Azure or Kubernetes since 2015 on AWS, and started spending time on Google because it's a much friendlier experience to develop on Google, much faster spin-up times too. And yeah, I'm ready to give my inside views on the quirks, so to say. A bit more about that later, maybe.
Well, I think I'm the newbie in this group. So I started in 2017. That's the very first project I did. Actually, I used a GCP GKE. That's where I deployed my application. And in a recent role where actually we built a platform on AWS, EKS. So I don't have any experience actually with AKS. That's the Azure Managed Kubernetes Services.
I think three of you, or certainly 3 or 4 of you, that mentioned about AWS being something that you probably got more experience on than the other. I know, Maurice, you mentioned about GCP and Open as well. But is it just because Amazon works better, or because it's got more services, or why is Amazon such a popular one among you guys?
Good question. I'd say probably it's how the kind of market share that Amazon has. Obviously, Google being the sort of maintainers of Kubernetes and creators of Kubernetes, their offering is always going to be better and more advanced. Their kind of workflow is certainly better, but I guess traditionally where organizations have started consuming cloud in Amazon, it's normally the kind of go-to when you're moving into that container world.
Okay, there was a question that came up in the chat from Mark. His question is, are there any preferences for a particular provider, or is the implementation the same across providers?
Just go with GKE.
Yeah.
Like, save yourself the pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are actually...
Fan, sorry?
Yeah, so I think day one thing is like similar in most of the providers. When it comes to day two, when you have to like upgrade your cluster to the newer version, I think it's more painful actually if you are using AWS EKS. In GCP GKE, I think it's very easy.
Okay.
I think it's sort of more generally speaking, it's about the available services as well, right? So, you know, Kubernetes is pretty much the same across the free cloud providers. So it's really what you're using alongside to complement. You know, if you're just running Kubernetes and that's it, then arguably there's probably little difference between the free platforms. But I mean, more generally speaking, you tend to be using other managed services that are available. So, you know, I think it comes back to what kind of Jay was saying before around market share, but also around, you know, available features, and AWS is just way ahead in terms of available features at the moment.
Yeah, I think I kind of echo what Rob is saying there, right? If you're going to do large data crunching, like Google's probably a good place to go because they've got all of the tooling to be able to do large amounts of data crunching with their analytics tooling. But if you're looking at just general usage, then it doesn't really matter, right? They've all got managed database providers. They've all got managed Elastic searches. Like they've got managed Kafka instances. It really comes down to, yeah, market share, what the enterprise or the business is happy with, and then looking at the differentiators in terms of managed providers and, you know, managed resources to make that really final distinction and decision.
Yeah, just listen to the customer and you can give greenfield advice.
Nice one. Okay, cool. I hope that answered your question, Mark. Moving on to the next question.
I guess I can start if we want. We're Kafka centric at Metal. We run Kafka on Kubernetes. I'll leave that up to your decision of whether that was a wise decision or not. What it does do, I think, like the best practices are, you've got to be really comfortable with running workloads in Kubernetes before you really look at running stateful sets, right? Because the data portion is the thing that you really care about. Like running stateful pods is, you know, trivial with some of the higher level abstractions that Kubernetes gives you. For us, it was really around like Kafka running inside Kubernetes is one thing, but actually how do we use it and how do people interact with it? So building a custom operator that we can declaratively declare topics and then being created and manipulated inside of you know, the Kafka cluster inside Kubernetes. But also it allowed us to be able to have that consistent paradigm for deployments. So yeah, those are kind of the two things for me. It's not just necessarily running the workload, it's how do you interface and how do you use it.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of echo those comments in terms of the sort of maintenance and operability of the stateful thing that you're running. So if you you know, a platform engineer, or you're trying to serve this this service, then doing it through an operator, and depending on the maturity of that operator, so that you're not sort of installing it and upgrading it, but dealing with more the kind of backup and disaster recovery and the non-functional requirement side of things, is probably more important than just having something stateful run.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of people probably miss off when they're sort of thinking about running complex services like that on Kubernetes as well. It's all the sort of hidden operational and management tasks that that people probably, you know, don't necessarily consider. So I think, you know, generally, you know, if you're wanting to be running those things on Kubernetes, go right ahead. There's lots of reasons to do that. But I think, you know, the other argument is actually there's plenty of managed services available for tools like that. But, you know, if you're not doing something particularly complex with it, so you know, if you just need the basic services, you need them to work, you want someone else to take care of, you know, sort of day-to-day management, patching, backups, and all of that stuff. Try and move as much stuff as you can into the kind of, you know, the cloud providers managed services. So, you know, whether that's managed Kafka, managed databases, you know, so on.
Yeah, if I can add something to that, it touches also one of the later questions about operators. I think it has to do with trust in general. You want to see like a track record in trust regarding the technology that you need, whether it can be operated by humans or artificial operators. Once you see the track record and you trust it, I think you can start using it, right? And I think, yes, stateful sets. Kubernetes is a new platform for state. Sure. Yes? Go ahead.
I think one of the other things to be careful of, though, is like the managed service providers. Yeah, they do give you all of this stuff outside the box, but they're not a silver bullet. They do come with their own problems, and it's about, you know, it's about weighing up those kind of things. So yeah, they will probably do the backups for you. They'll probably do the upgrades for you. But the way that you interface with it and interact with it may become a little bit more complex because you've gone that route. So it's kind of horses for courses, really. But it's there. The ability to be able to do it is there, but you kind of do need experts in those areas, and you're going to need them to be around, because with Kubernetes and the whole desired state, and you know, those workloads could go down at any point, and they're going to get put somewhere else. And how are you going to deal with them, and how to make sure that your microservices can still talk to them? You know, there's all those kind of operation and operability questions that you've got to think about as well when you go with managing your own stateful sets, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the hidden cost generally, right? So you're not just, you know, you've gone from needing to be an expert in Kubernetes to also needing to be an expert in Kafka, and then also needing to be an expert in, you know, database replication and whatever else you then decide to deploy into Kubernetes. So a lot of it is about whether you want to spend that time. So you know, arguably there are definitely advantages to running stuff yourself, but there are also, you know, time consumers. That's the main thing.
Yeah, and to add to that, it's what you want to do as a business, right? Because once you kind of take on the challenge of running it, then you own that debt. You own that debt forever, or for as long as it takes for you to move on to something like a managed service.
I've done most scenarios. Let me talk about the two more prevalent ones. The ones where you give all the resources that you want to deploy onto the cluster in the repo and make it the responsibility of the developers. It was a cumbersome approach. Everybody needs to be brought up to speed, which is like following the DevOps philosophy, which is nice, right? So everybody benefits from learning, but yeah, it just brings so much baggage and yeah, steep learning curves that I think nowadays, what are developers good at? Well, that is their software and not their infrastructure. So we just let them deliver containers, and we say, yes, great, you got a container. We'll just take it from there. What URL do you want to run it on? Do you have custom certificates, or do you want to auto-generate it? There you go, auto-scalable. And then maybe, you know, annotate some behavior around that, how you want that to be done. But yeah.
I think for me, it comes back to domain expertise, right? All of your application developers are not going to become Kubernetes gurus and understand the difference between a deployment and a replica set, right? And neither should they really need to. But if we can use the Helm chart as the abstraction or the interface to onboarding their application into the cluster to be able to run, they only have to really understand one Helm chart, essentially. So at Metal, we have this concept of a backend chart, and that's the interface for them to onboard. And then using GitOps, which I'm going to skip over because we're going to come on to that later, they declare their Helm release. They understand those values and what they mean, you know, the toggles of being on and off. And then their application gets deployed. So all of the kind of best practices, in inverted commas, even though I don't really like that word, are embedded into the backend Helm chart so that they don't have to worry about it. Think consistent label taxonomy, think horizontal pod auto scaling, all of those kind of things. And we just enable toggles that toggle these things on and off, and make it easy for them to onboard. So it's about the self-service, really, for me, and how easy we can make it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think
Oh, go on. Sorry.
Sure. So I think we do a fairly sort of similar thing to Steve by the sounds of it. And I think probably from a consultancy background as well, the nature of what we do sort of tends to mean that the infrastructure stuff does end up largely kind of separated from the application, sort of generally speaking. So Helm charts tend to be coupled quite tightly with the application code itself, like with the application repositories. And then for all of the infrastructure stuff, that's all entirely Terraform driven. So we tend not to use Helm for anything other than the actual application deployments. So anything sort of, you know, in the system namespaces or anything like that is generally provisioned by Terraform instead.
Nice. I was going to say that for us, it kind of depends, I guess, on the team and the capability. So we have, you know, talking about sort of Kubernetes adoption, we have, or container adoption more so. The developer, the journey of the developer is, you know, when they're working locally, getting up to speed with containers, it's normally sort of Docker and Docker Compose, and then it's an operational sort of decision to move into an orchestrator, you know, use an orchestrator like Kubernetes. So the developer now has to think about how to upskill, and that becomes their problem. So some organizations have the appetite to make it their problem and some don't. So where they have the appetite to make it a kind of more DevOpsy type approach, put them in the same repo or don't. It's kind of up to, depending on how much iteration that's going into both of those. And if they don't have the appetite, then maybe make it easier for them to take your compose files, use something like compose with a K, and you know, try and get something usable, either using Customize or Helm or just Kubernetes manifests being spat out at the other end, that they can then be used as a sort of artifact for down the line.
Yeah, I think we had a similar kind of approach where we had this Kubernetes manifest along with the repository of application itself, but we were also deploying that one into a service mesh. So all service meshes configuration was completely into different repo, and that was completely handled by us. We were actually looking after that, which service can talk to which service and what are the controller and everything actually was in place. And that worked fine. And one thing was, like, someone mentioned about the best practices for the Kubernetes manifest as well, like having your security context and having number of things actually you can put in place, and then take developers actually on board with that. Just a little bit explaining, actually, I think it did work in our case. And having that template, whenever actually they turn out a new service, a new applications, they just copied that template and then put that into their application repository.
Yeah, I think the thing to note is that a Helm chart doesn't have to be coupled to the microservice that it's running. It's you know, it's a way of templatizing, you know, resources that get deployed to Kubernetes. So what developers do love to do is copy and paste, and whether that copy and paste is correct or not depends upon what they're running, right? But if we have, you know, if you have a skeleton essentially that they have to conform to, or a standard that they have to conform to, then it's a question about whether we, you know, whether we enable that toggle for you to turn your container from running on user 1000 to user 2000 because you have to, or the port is different or something like that. But expecting them, especially with the number of microservices that, you know, how easy it is to deploy to Kubernetes nowadays, you're talking of hundreds of different microservices, if not thousands. You don't really want hundreds and thousands of Helm charts that you have to manage. Like having a centralized location to embed security, and they have a new chart version, and all you have to do is tell them, can you please upgrade to the new chart version? It's going to make everybody's life much, much easier. But for you to go and tell them that they need to go and add security contexts, they won't even know what security contexts are, and they probably won't know the right location to put it in. And that, neither should they. They're focusing on delivering business value to customers, not configuring YAML files.
And that comes back to where I started. Because ultimately, I think you would like to abstract that away, because it's error prone. You know, it's not predictable. you could actually look at a container and see the input that a container needs. It's quite easily reducible to environment variables in the form of plain text or secrets and some file mounts. And ultimately, you don't want anybody to care about how many containers need to run. That's like such an abstract concept. You just want it to scale. You just want to say, hey, this is this type of service. And I just want it to behave like that. Please take it from me. And I don't care about ports, all of that stuff, but I do know what needs to go in. And you know, the developers, I see this nice separation between ops, DevOps, and dev, you know, which comes into fashion lately, and it kind of makes sense. So you can have developers just develop containers and have people who are more up to speed with them, knowledgeable about the whole infrastructure layer, look at how they want to deliver this. Because we internally, we abstract everything away and deliver only Knative services to the teams. So it's kind of like very opinionated. So, but you know, the Helm charts are cumbersome in my opinion. We still use them for core applications. That the stack consists of a lot of charts actually. We have a mono repo with a shitload of charts, but it works. And so we have that under our own control. And then the people who deploy into the platform, they just deliver a container and the URL, like I said, and all the parameters that they need. That's it. And everything else, it gets deployed in a predictable fashion with policies included, network policies, everything that you need to have like a multi-tenancy approach that's currently possible.
I guess the problem with kind of abstracting away too much is when you have those more kind of advanced sort of things that are coming in place. Like let's you know, talking about, say, some of the things that have come out in 1.18, although, you know, one might say it's more kind of about how you're managing the ops side of things, so like hierarchical namespaces and things like that, or like ingress classes being moved up a level. But it's where you are abstracting everything away from a developer, maybe there's a bit more engineering effort that needs to happen in terms of you being able to support that abstraction, and whether you make that the ownership of the developer to learn it or not is, yeah, again, another kind of decision that needs to be made by the org.
You want to have a playground for sure.
Yeah.
And but to limit that down, it actually makes quite a lot of sense to have these limitations when you go more, you know, more towards the edge.
I think you have to be careful though, and Jay, I might be putting words in your mouth, so excuse me and tell me if I am. But you're kind of saying that if we make the abstraction too abstract, that we don't understand what these toggles are actually doing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, they don't need to care that the end. Like a prime example for us was the move ages ago from Kubernetes 1.14 to Kubernetes 1.16, where they deprecated a load of APIs. The developers don't give a crap about that. Right, yeah. But we do. So we create a new chart rather than version 1.x, we change it to 2.x, and then when we say for you to be able to onboard onto the new cluster, just upgrade your chart and replace the 1 dot with a 2 dot, and we'll handle the rest of it for you.
Yeah.
And the abstraction or the interface hasn't changed, but they can still deploy to new environments.
Yeah.
And it's just the self-service model really, and getting that abstraction, and that abstraction won't be the same for everybody. You know, it's going to be specific to the organization that you're running within. But if you can get it so that all of the developers understand those toggles, then you're off to the races, right? If they can deploy microservices into the clusters without having to worry about, you know, all of these higher level Kubernetes abstractions, then you've kind of won.
That's it. Exactly. So I guess this being a sort of DevOps panel and that culture being all about sort of you build it, you run it. If you abstract it too much, if you abstract it away too much, you don't know what you're running, and that becomes very, very hard to sort of debug.
Things still go wrong all the time because of these version mismatches, and you have to inspect the pipeline, which still always shows the diff, and so you can still always see like, oh, that's what it's doing. All right, and then it's up to the developer. I think the people you have on board, how curious they are and they want to contribute to that layer actually.
Yeah, the other thing actually, we can put number of tools like linting tools, keep well, keep score, and then it's conf test and that kind of thing as well in place. So if they're going to make some changes, you will find it early. That was actually our approach. I'm not saying it was going to work for everyone, but that did work. And we did not have like hundreds of microservices. We had like 10 plus. And I believe that when you grow and when you introduce more services, then you actually develop some kind of a pattern and then you look for the solution. So that's how actually it went ahead for us.
Talking about linting. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I would love for more tools to come on board on top of that bare Kubernetes powerhouse that we have, because I was just talking to my workers about referential integrity of resources. You can just deploy stuff and remove stuff that depends on each other. And yeah, nothing will tell you that something will break. And I'm pretty sure lots more abstractions in the form of operators or permission webhooks will come into play. That will, narrow down your field of operation, but will make it more predictable.
Like gatekeeper and open agent policy, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's very powerful stuff.
I don't necessarily
kind of application SIG. I think that tries to deal with some of that complexity. So trying to tie down the sort of dependencies between resources. I don't know where the project's going to go, obviously, but yeah, there's definitely things in that space.
We use it, it's beautiful. You can say very granular. You can just code policies. You have to be very careful always with admission webhooks. You can just filter out the good stuff.
It's interesting to hear from you all, like the different processes, different ways of doing things, different experiences you've had. Some people are further along the journey or the adoption or the implementation of certain parts of Kubernetes and some aren't. So it's interesting to hear the different kind of views from you guys actually. So Maurice, you mentioned a moment ago about bare metal. It's something I picked up on. So Mark, you asked a question earlier on today, actually had a question. I don't know if this ties in nicely with what we're talking about now, but I guess I'll just fire it straight to you, Maurice. He asked if anyone had experience in translating bare metal implementations to cloud providers and whether it was a smooth process or not.
Bare metal. Well, actually, I cannot say that much about it. We're just implementing an on-prem deployment. We just today actually managed to get something online, and we have we had to do some tunneling for that to get some ingress happening. So no, I'm not an expert on that in that regard. I have to say.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I can talk to that. In a previous role as a consultant, we moved them from an on-premise kind of bare metal cluster to running in Amazon. But the thing to kind of remember is the real difference is a couple of things, right? It's the Kubernetes cluster itself in terms of how it gets provisioned. If you go straight to a managed service, a lot of that is abstracted away from you. The real difference comes down to storage and what's available, right? And how you leverage the storage, because the way that you deploy your applications a lot of the time are going to be the same way, right? You're always going to do a deployment. You're always going to have some config maps. Those things aren't going to change, but the way that you route traffic into the cluster and the way that you deal with storage is probably your two main differences there. But Kubernetes is kind of giving us that abstraction in such a way that we see Kubernetes as a single machine or a single entity, and it kind of abstracts that underlying infrastructure away from us. The difference is the storage piece that doesn't necessarily do that. There is not a one-to-one mapping between on-premise storage and kind of cloud provider storage.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because you have like 3 machines and you have 3 disks, and how do you deal with how do you use that storage? Do you connect every disk to one host, or do you create like a network abstraction service for the state? And then we chose the latter, and we just interface it with Rook, which is a nice setup. And you can just define your own storage classes, and we give it the same names for all the other clouds. And well, we have to still test drive that, but yeah.
Nice. Okay. All right, cool. Thank you for that, guys. That was just a side questionnaire from Mark again. So thanks, Mark. Keep the questions coming in. The next one, guys, on the list, question number 4 that I sent you earlier was
I'll take the GitOps part because I think that's kind of 2 questions that are slightly different in kind of answer. So from a GitOps perspective, right, for us, it's allowing the developers to focus on the things that are important to them. So it comes back to that self-service model, really. So they define the way that they want the system to look like. So they define their kind of Helm release. And with tooling such as like Weaveworks Flux, it has the ability to annotate workloads or deployments and look for new images. So now in terms of a pipeline to production, they create the Helm releases in their Git repo, and we have a Flux instance that reconciles. And then for them to make changes to their microservices, they build new images, upload them to the registry, and essentially have a very limited kubectl configuration that essentially waits for that to be completed, and then they run their tests. So for us, it's allowed us to be able to really increase the speed of innovation, reduce the complexity between CI pipelines because they're all now cookie cutter because they all do the same thing and they're focusing on the CI. And kind of to chuck some numbers out there, 220 deploys to production and 220 of them were successful last month. And nice. The reason why is because we're doing a lot of the stuff up front. So we've got really strict linting on as part of our PRs. So we've already, Irfan mentioned kind of kubeval and conf test and stuff like that. We have a lot of that up front for you to be able to get even into a position whereby you can make Kubernetes based changes. And then the developers are focusing on the things that are important to them. So getting the confidence to allow that development microservice version to go to staging and then go to production.
100% success rate is pretty impressive, mate, whichever way you look at it.
I didn't deploy anything, so it's...
Thank you credit. Anyone else got views on this question?
I have a very opinionated one again. We have reduced the GitOps state storage to one single repo. We call it the values repo. And it holds all the necessary input for the mono repo to generate all the resources. And it's actually editable through a user interface, which interfaces with our API, which has an open API spec. So it's you can actually investigate what you can manipulate on our landscape, and then commit it, and then you put a ribbon around it, and that is it introduces the next state of the repo, and yeah, everything is easily trackable. So we've done away with actually with regular database. We just use Git for our database.
I guess to sort of add to that as well, I think from our point of view, sort of one of the main features or I guess benefits is observability, sort of more generally. So I think historically developers have been sort of purposely separated from having to take any sort of responsibility around monitoring and performance, not necessarily performance, but performance monitoring at the very least. So I think, GitOps, everything being within version control, it's all in one place. There's kind of that, single area of responsibility around every new feature you introduce, monitoring and checks along with that as well. And then obviously you've also got the sort of audibility side of things as well.
Yeah, I guess the sort of GitOps model isn't necessarily new. It's just using the sort of Git events to drive what's happening in the environments, which obviously adds to the sort of auditability and visibility of what's going on in the sort of state, and also kind of depending on what type of workloads you're on, and might add to your sort of non-functional sort of requirements with backup and disaster recovery or whatever. But it's in terms of the responsibility in with your sort of deployment and development environment. It's just moving the CD part out of your CI system into Git, which yeah, definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one thing about this GitOps is obviously that we are going to, and we should actually, if you are using continuous deployment, to go through number of stages, deploy into different environments. So in GitOps, I think question for Steve, that how did you manage these Kubernetes resources for a different environment? Because I believe that obviously, as you say, you were not keeping those resources inside the application repository. It was kept separately. So how did you manage? There are multiple approaches. If you want to share, please.
So yeah, we're heavy users of Kustomize. So we have a number of different repositories that their focus is to reconcile state into the cluster for a number of different things. So Kubernetes, we have K8's resources, which is kind of platform level workloads. And they all track master, but they look at a specific directory, and that directory is dev. So Flux is looking at that directory. So for us to be able to reconcile changes into the cluster, there are a number of Flux instances looking at a number of repos, and they're all looking at some directory / and then the environment prefix. So we kind of have this environment prefix that flows all the way through in all different repositories. So if you're creating a secret and it needs to go in dev, you know the directory that it goes in. If you're creating a Helm release for your application in dev, you know where it needs to go. And for me, it's about, you know, consistency is key, and keeping the cognitive load down is also key. So as long as the developers understand, or the engineers or whoever's deploying, they understand this 3-character environment prefix and what it is actually doing and how it works, then they're kind of off to the races. And I think it's allowed us to be able to have quote unquote gatekeepers in the correct locations for the things that they are important, they care about. So talking about kind of domain level knowledge, right? So we have Kafka topics, you know, an engineer or myself, for example, creates a Kafka topic and sets the replication factor to like 3,000 because I don't know what I'm doing. We have code owners on the PR. We have linting that would stop that because, you know, that's obviously silly. But we can use the PR as the gatekeeper into making changes into our environment. And we have code owners, we use code owners, you know, within our Git repos to make sure that the right people have the right eyes, that have the domain knowledge to know what that's going to do. So if you're going to make a change to base, as an example, well, that's going to change every single environment at you know, the immediate merge into master. So that needs a different set of eyes to just you making a change to dev, for example. So it's a separation of concerns, separation of duties, and keeping the domain knowledge to the people that really know about it, and, you know, getting that abstraction right, to kind of Jay's point.
This may or may not fit more with Jay, Maurice and Rob, because you've been in a position of sort of building a startup from early and then scaling. So, but, you know, get involved, Steve, and fan as well. I'm sure you've got some views on it. But the question is, for a cost-conscious startup, would you recommend using Kubernetes from the very start or as early as possible? Or would you suggest moving to Kube further down the line?
Good question. I would perhaps flip it on its head a little, depending on what you're trying to do. So, and how much, how empowered your developers are to understand the cost and the decisions that they're making. So maybe it's not necessarily, you know, just kind of default Kubernetes that they're using. It's something that overlays on top of Kubernetes. Like we have this in our products where before you actually, you know, deploy a workload or create a namespace or create a cluster, the developers are seeing the impacts of the choices that they're about to make. So maybe it's about them being more aware of the choices that they're making rather than necessarily just using Kubernetes. And you know, I guess there's kind of efficiencies in using Kubernetes that that you would get if you were to use it instead of, you know, going down the sort of normal VM approach, like auto scaling and right sizing and scheduling and using spot instances and this, that, and the other. So you get all of the good stuff, but you also get an idea of what you're going to spend before you spend it.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about sort of a relatively new startup as well, I think there's so I think from our point of view, when we go out and we talk to customers about what the sort of right technology choices are for them and things like that, you know, there is a level of development and engineering maturity that I think you need to be able to run Kubernetes the right way, for want of a better phrase. And you know, I think that's one of the things to take away from, you know, a lot of the comments that have been made in this session, right? It's all about experience. So you know, the first person that you hire in your startup is not going to be an expert in Kubernetes. More than likely, they're going to be a developer to get you a functional application. So I think generally speaking, you'd be looking at more basic cloud services initially, and then, you know, once you're at a point where you have more developers, you have engineering teams, and you're trying to scale and give people more flexibility to do things themselves, and you know, maybe not be as hand tied by the cloud APIs, then that's the kind of time where something like Kubernetes would make more sense.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would add to that, like, most of us are probably oriented or grew up in big companies or working for big companies that have different projects, so like a multi-tenant setup. But if you're a startup and you're just aiming to build out your product, I don't really see the advantage of investing a lot of effort in this space, because there's so much options to like Google Functions or Fargate at your disposal with readily available backends, stateful backends. You have tools that give you rapid application, you know, development speed. I mean, Kubernetes is more of like a middle. If it's small to medium-sized business that sees a path to growth towards multiple applications with multiple applications involved, yeah, I think Kubernetes is the #1 go-to.
Yeah, I think just to sort of echo that as well. I don't think that the question is really whether you would be running Kubernetes or not when you're coming with a new technology stack. It's whether you're going to be using containers for a new application more generally, right? So you know, there's enough serverless services out there now that you know, if you're starting an application from scratch, you know, it's pros and cons, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're kind of starting an application from scratch, it's almost you know, going down a container route or a serverless route is a different way of architecting the app completely, right? And then the cost implications of going down those routes as well could be potentially huge, with step functions and whatever else in cloud not making it easy, like in every other scenario, about the choices that you're about to make, and how much is happening with your application.
Yeah, I think for me specifically, it's about, like, when you're a startup and you've got to get the application to the customer, right? But you've got to get it to the customer in such a way that in 3 to 6 months time, you haven't wasted a load of effort and realized that you've made the wrong technology choice. So for me personally, the reason why I would go to Kubernetes is because, you know, it runs anywhere, right? A Lambda only runs in Lambda, right? You do have to configure it slightly differently to run it somewhere else. It may be a small tweak or it may be a huge tweak. And, you know, we have the managed service providers now, you know, the big three, if we're talking about the big three cloud providers that provide you managed Kubernetes, and that provides you with a deployment target. And then you just have to work out how you get your application onto that deployment target. And you're not going to look backwards necessarily in 3 months' time and say, oh, crap, I made the wrong decision. It's going to be actually probably more like, how do I productionize this deployment? How do I get CI? How do, you know, all of the kind of data operation things that probably are going to get missed because we're just trying to ship the app to customers to start with.
Yeah, exactly. And on top of that, I guess there's plenty of kind of open source offerings to simplify that cloud choice. So, you know, on top of the kind of the fact that you have these managed Kubernetes services in sort of the big three, you could still do things badly.
Yeah.
And there are I don't mean to keep sort of tooting the app via horn, but there are sort of products that we've created or other companies have created that that sort of play to minimizing that cognitive load in getting started and cost associated with it.
Nice. Okay, that question was actually from Mark, the guy that asked the very first question, and he's just said he really appreciates everyone's input there because that's exactly what he was asking for. So glad that we can help someone out in the group. That's what we're here for. So thanks for that. Conscious of the time, and we're literally on question number 4, but I'll shoot straight on to question number 5 nonetheless.
So I think I kind of mentioned something about this earlier. So in the latest version of Kubernetes in 1.18, they've actually introduced better kind of path matching. So on ingress classes, exact pattern matches and prefix. So ingress resources now essentially fully support wildcards, but it will take a while for ingress controllers to. But obviously Nginx being kind of maintained by the same Kubernetes ecosystem should, I'm guessing that will be one of the first to sort of adopt it.
Well, so I think in our case, we did not actually do anything specifically to handle this wildcard hosts. What we did instead was actually we used Ansible to deploy our resources, and then we actually put all those variables, like whatever the known was, in a dictionary. And then when we start building this ingress, so we read from there, and then we had a number of rules rather than just being one wildcard host. So I think the workaround was not use a wildcard host and like have all those rules explicitly defined in your ingress specification.
Yeah, it gives a lot of advantages at the same time. We had wildcard hosts working from the start. Actually, we had no problem with wildcard hosts. They were just supported, I think, on all the 3 big clouds that we were using. Actually, we would get external DNS working with it fine. We had Let's Encrypt certificates running fine, until the point that Let's Encrypt had this problem end last year. And together with Azure, oh my gosh. So that all stopped working instantly. And we had to just go to fixed domain names. And ever since, I'm like, okay, well, they're free anyway. So we just generate everything on a fixed domain. It just takes a little bit more time for getting IPs to come up because they're all asking for their own IP, which is always the same, but you know, it still takes time.
Yeah, for us specifically at Metal, like we get around it by not doing it. So we have a very strict DNS prefix, so it's always the microservice dot the namespace dot the environment that it's running in, and they're all C names to a load balancer that's called ingress.platform.blah, and it just keeps everything really, really straightforward and simple, right? If I'm looking at GraphQL in Eevee as an example, I'm browsing to this URL, I know the exact place inside Kubernetes where that is going to be, and it just, again, to the cognitive load point, it just keeps that really low.
You could share your prod API, Steve, the address. That'd be really useful. Just
I'll let you guys follow up after.
We will be open sourcing our stack at some point soon, I hope within 2 months. It has a quite advanced setup of ingress with a front-facing load balancer, also resulting in this predictable routing. And yeah, you can just expect everything to be always the same towards any microservice. So yeah, coming soon.
Nice. Rob, have you come across this problem before?
I can't say I have, to be honest. I mean, it sounds pretty similar to what Steve said, to be honest. Most of the stuff that we do is also standardized DNS. So everything for us, everything runs on AWS anyway. So we use the AWS load balancer ALB ingresses with Kubernetes. So all DNS records, including wildcards, point to that, and then within Kubernetes itself, there's specific ingresses then for each application based on the service name and the environment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. A question has just come up from Laurie. He has asked, what the let's encrypt problem was last year?
I'd rather not relive it, to be honest.
Rather not watch it.
I'd rather not relive that moment, to be honest.
I thought you said you didn't want to answer it. Just quiet it off.
I actually can't remember because I've evaporated it from my mind. I just remember writing a lovely bash script that would fix it, but I can't remember what it was. I think it was one of the CAs they expired or something? I can't remember now.
Something like that. It had to do with an expiry date. They set a very short expiry date somewhere on their own CA or something. I'm not quite sure at all, but it resulted in the termination of all of these wildcard certificates and a lot of other certificates for that matter. But yeah, they get recycled quickly. So
sounds like everybody's just kind of erased this from their memory. Rightly so. Said thanks as well. Conscious of the time, guys, I guess we may have time for maybe one or two. I know you're probably talked out, Jay, like you said earlier, so we'll do one or two more questions, but obviously I'm sure you guys have some stuff you'd like to wrap up as well. But the next question, which was number 6 on our list, would be,
Cube resource report probably would be my first place to go. That tells you if you're over provisioned in pods and stuff and nodes, and as long as you can configure it correctly, that gives you quite a good idea. That's what we've used to kind of get the answer to that. But you also need some buffer room as well, right? So at Metal, we talk about the 125% rule. So we're ready to take 125% of the load of peak time so that we have that buffer. So there's a little bit of maths that we have to do there, but they would be the two things that I'd recommend.
okay.
Yeah,
valuable.
And I guess to add to that, the things to understand what the kind of workload ask. So some sort of monitoring, managing the quality of your service, potentially having like a cluster autoscaler or something like that to reduce your spend if that's what you're obviously trying to do. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you definitely need monitoring and some sane set of rules. I would say that investigate what is going on and report onto you like, hey, I'm noticing this. I love Prometheus operator. I think we all use it. It comes out of the box with all of that. But you need to tune it to your liking. And that is always the hard work.
And you've got like kind of things like the vertical pod autoscaler and stuff like that. That's there. You've also got the downscaler as well, which, you know, removes nodes to kind of save giving Jeff Bezos even more money than he has already.
Poor guy.
Poor guy.
Poor guy. Poor guy.
That's definitely not the word to call him.
Not sure that's ever been used to describe Mr.
Jeff Bezos, yeah.
Okay, cool. Guys, what I'll do is go to one final question, quite a nice one to wrap it up actually, just to get a view from all of you, so one after the other. Quite a nice way to end it, I guess, for people that are listening, if they're kind of entry level or mid-level looking to go another route. But
big question.
I can go if no one else is ready to go.
Yeah, go for it.
For me, it's focusing on the fundamentals, right? Focus on the easy things, the things that really allow you to be able to deploy applications. Start with understanding your deployment. Start understanding your config maps, like secrets, ingress, stuff like that. Don't go like, I've been to so many customers that are so focused on the service mesh that they can't even deploy their application, but they think the service mesh is literally like the next greatest thing and it's going to solve all their problems. If I'm starting from scratch, I'm thinking, okay, start with something that really annoys me in my at work, like an engineering problem, and then work on seeing how Kubernetes can help you fix that problem, right? And then you're naturally gonna get buy-in to really try and understand and, you know, figure this stuff out. And then it's a case of really kind of going on a journey of adoption with those kind of core components. Like the core components of Kubernetes don't really change, right? Very, very often they're very stable and mature. Get a really good understanding of those fundamentally, and then look at how you can put more glue and more kind of knobs and dials to twist to give you more from what you've already got.
Yeah, and I guess to add to that is don't overcomplicate it. So you know, if you're kind of depending on which sort of angle you're coming from, if you're from an application development team, then at the end of the day, you just want your app to be up and stay alive, and you know, not sort of affect other apps on the platform and things like that. So there's things that can be done at both the sort of platform level. I mean, conceptually, maybe the single tenant cluster over multi-tenant cluster is that argument has been won, but I'm not sure. But there's things that you could do at the platform level to make sure that tenants aren't affecting each other, whether it is completely separating those workloads, having like namespaces, pod security policies, removing privileged containers being run, read-only root file systems, have your application having multiple replicas, scalable, responding to sort of SIG terms properly. Loads, yeah, just there's like an endless list.
Everything, everything. No, thanks for that. It's good to share insights. Rob, I'll come to you next. Another person who's in a position of, you know, C-suite and co-founder. What would you do differently?
So are we talking in terms of, you know, sort of getting started in your career and stuff like that? I didn't quite catch the.
Yeah, I mean, this one I guess may not relate to you as much as the other guys in terms of Kubernetes and the adoption that you've had, but it was more about what you do differently if you were starting out again. You start with Kubernetes specifically.
So I think, you know, if we're talking sort of more technology and career-wise and stuff like that, rather than sort of individual technologies, I think my biggest bit of advice would not be to focus solely on a single piece of technology, basically. Focus more on concepts and what, you know, the concepts largely apply to lots of different technologies. Technology landscape changes all the time. I think this is more me coming from a consultancy background, right? So, you know, the hot technology now is one thing, and you know, we need to focus on what that is right now, and then in a couple of years it will all be, you know, completely different. But you know, relatively the concepts all remain the same, and you know, if you've got foundational knowledge of those, then you know, you can apply them sort of across the field, I guess.
Nice. Okay. Maurice, come to you next.
Yeah, I'm a bit split here. With all my headaches about Kubernetes, I would just say, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't get involved. Don't use it. Just go have a nice holiday or simple tools to get things done. And what is your objective?
You're on the wrong
like
meetup.
What?
You're at the wrong meetup. This is a Kubernetes virtual meetup.
Well, you know, that's the one end, but on the other end, I see this need for automation. Like I said, I love automation. Since I was young, I was just wanted to abstract away stuff and just make stuff less boring, be more creative instead of repetitive. So, you know, you got this whole toolbox. This do-it-yourself landscape has been made possible. You know, it's just Lego nowadays. I can just try anything, throw it on the platform, and just, I can do prototyping like this and that, and decide whether to throw it away or use it or keep it. It's magic. So, but yeah, you got to get up to speed. Yeah,
Brilliant.
It's hard work.
Yeah, thank you for that. Fan, last but certainly by no means least, what would you do differently, Kubernetes related? Now you know what you know about it.
So the one thing actually I'd say about my last project actually where we built the platform. So we used Terraform to build the infrastructure and EKS. And then on top of EKS, we deployed API gateway, Aqua CSP, and service meshes. And we used Ansible to do that. Now, actually, if I had to do that, well, most probably I'll do everything in Terraform to bring the whole thing in one thing. The other thing I see is like working with the developers is really, really important. We did tell them that we need a couple of health check endpoints, and that will be like, that's how it's going to work. They confirmed that, okay, they understood it. And if you see actually the implementation, they build both the endpoints in the same way. So most probably actually work with them and then try a little harder to explain that how actually these two things works. That's one thing. And we started with a very simple manifest. We did not have like all your security context and every single thing, what actually the best practices are suggested for a security of the cluster and the whole workloads. So we did not start actually all of those together. So now I have more experience. So when actually I go and then I have to build it, most probably I'll put that one from the start, because I have educated myself more on the security side of things. I'll use that one in the very first place.
Before we sign off, guys, is there anything else that you wanted to finish off with? Any last thoughts you had?
Yeah, I had another answer to your question, actually, your final question, which is like, expect the apps to fail. They will fail. And to Jay's point about SIG-term, they have to gracefully fail. Right? They will die. People think that because it's on Kubernetes, they're just going to live forever, but it's not going to happen.
Hopefully your monitoring will not fail first. So set it up, let it give it high priority.
Yep.
Brilliant. Jay, Rob, any last thoughts from you guys?
Say, you know, when kind of learning about Kubernetes, there's loads of kind of open source. There's so much content out there nowadays, and so many sort of tools and open source tools that have tried to help people adopt Kubernetes in a much more efficient way, so that you don't have to go through all of the learnings of using Kubernetes and Angus since God knows when. So yeah, just do your research. I guess keep going to meetups like these, because you get to learn about what other companies are doing and what not to do. But yeah.
Yeah, well, Rob's just actually commented. Rob, Mark, the guy that's asked the question, he said he's found this a very useful session. So yeah, absolutely, use this community, use these meetups. Robin, any final comments from yourself, mate?
I guess just, you know, sort of make the most out of the meetups. I think that's you know, that's pretty much what Jay said already. But you know, that's one of the sort of main things for me. There's plenty of meetups around on, you know, Kubernetes, on all of the different cloud providers. You know, there's plenty of different things to be joining and taking part in. And don't feel like you can't do your own talks and stuff as well. I think that would be the other thing. There's always places, you know, there's always meetups looking for people to talk. So